You're listening to the first episode of Mountains and Leadership Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Mark.
How you doing today?
Hey, I'm better than I deserve, man. How are you doing?
Upright and taking sustenance.
What's that?
Upright and taking sustenance. I can still eat today.
Never heard that before.
We're taking, like to quote Turbo, like out of our group, I like to let my work speak for itself.
I like that. I like that. So we are the Mountains and Leadership Podcast. Our mission is to hopefully help business leaders grow in terms of the way that they lead. Whether you're trying to leave a good legacy in your family, in your business, whether you lead a team, anything like that. What we're going after is trying to provide valuable content for people that are looking to leave those good legacies, and really understanding what that means is important because you go in to try to build some sort of mission or whatever out of a position of arrogance, to build your own little kingdom, to build yourself up out of ego. The legacy that you inadvertently end up leaving is one that would ultimately be poor and from a place of just not good things. And so what our podcast is hoping to do is bring those things together and talk through different topics related to leadership and your legacy, and how does that relate to business and in your personal life? Because you can hide who you are in corporate America, but it doesn't change who you really are. And those tendencies will come out as you're in there doing business and doing life with other people. And so, our mission is to hopefully help with those things and to help folks consider those things and provide valuable content that would ultimately lead to more wisdom. And, it's said that knowledge is the right use, wisdom is the right use of knowledge, rather. And so what we're hoping to do is take that knowledge that you may already have as a business owner or leader or someone leading your family, and turn that into something more palatable, and more valuable, not for only you, but for the people around you. And so to get started, wanted to tell you a little bit about how we came to where we are today. So Mark, you've been in the industry, over 20 years? Where are you at now?
26 years now.
26 years
in real estate. Yep.
Okay. And when you say real estate, define that.
So I started out lending in 2014, went over and got my real estate license, 6 years of going over to the dark side, came back into lending. Now I'm an area manager here in Colorado.
Okay.
And I like the numbers side of it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, so Mark and I got hooked up through the world of real estate. My background is let me just go from the beginning. So I started off working as a home designer and put myself through school washing cars years ago, and pretty brutal, but got through that and became a designer. And real estate was my first love, actually. I mean, and they always say you come back to your first love. So no offense to my wife, Ruth, but real estate was definitely my first love. And so here I am back at that now. But what ultimately led me there, it was more of an indirect path. So went from being a designer in a home building company out of Central Texas to, by the time I was done, I was doing graphic design for them. I was running all their heavy equipment, doing land development. I was sort of an all-around guy. I wore multiple hats over there at the time. And the owner of the company, he came in right around the 2008 recession, and he says to me, hey, I just had to let our VP go, and y'all know my policy, last one hired, first one fired. So Pat, you're up next. And then he just walks off, didn't really give that much care. So he was an interesting guy, but that was kind of a wake-up call for me, and I ended up actually not getting laid off next. I think I made it through several more rounds of layoffs before they finally came in and said they just didn't have the work for me. And so I leveraged that skill set and became
That's why we want to be our own boss too, right?
What's that?
We decide who stays and goes, right? We're our own bosses.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like corporate America really has no soul. No. And I'm not knocking you, corporate America, if you're listening to this. But you get to a point where you're so big that personal touch isn't there. And your employees, they don't really control their destiny. You control their destiny. in terms of what they do. Now they have a say so in the work that they do and their work ethic and things like that. So to some degree, I don't want to release them from that ownership that they should be having in terms of how they pursue their work while they're working in corporate America. But at least from my perspective, you get to a point where you're like a cog in the wheel. And so the actual company I was working for at the time, though, it was a bit smaller, but they had grown and they had moved into a new building, things like that. And it gets harder and harder to see those people as people as opposed to a number. And so I was on the receiving end of that early on, and it taught me a lot about what not to do as a leader running my own company. And so I never lost those memories. They've always stuck with me. I can remember the owner of that company talking to some people very awful. It was hard to work for him. So, but the skill set, learning how to work with someone like that, actually, it does make you stronger. And hopefully, your posture is, I'm not going to blame somebody else for my own shortcomings. I'm going to take ownership and I'm going to handle my business. And so effectively, that's what I ended up doing. I ended up leveraging that skill set, became a project manager in finance for a bank, actually still in corporate America at the time. And I absolutely hated it. It was about as boring as eating a dirt sandwich for me. I tell people that all the time. I love numbers, but I'm a people person and I like to be amongst others, having dialogue, working on big projects together, things like that. And I was sort of shoved in a cubicle. It just wasn't a really edifying experience for me. And so I ended up deciding, well, if I'm going to go back to school, now's the time to do it. So I went to petroleum engineering school at Texas A&M University. I was actually one of 10 transfer students that got accepted into their program. It was the most competitive program for petroleum engineering in the world at the time. And graduated with honors, had a job probably about a year before I graduated. And I worked doing a lot of investment analysis, worked as a reservoir engineer in oil and gas for several years before, I started running the numbers, and I'm making this company millions of dollars. And
when people are talking about like reservoir engineering, they think about the lake they're going out to. It's not the lakes. It's the one that's 10,000 feet down under the ground.
Yeah. So that's actually interesting. So I guess I should clarify that. When I talk about reservoir engineering, it's the oil and gas reservoir down below the Earth's surface, and typically that runs right around 10,000 foot deep. Some areas it's a bit deeper, some areas it's a bit more shallow. And I'm talking, 10 to 15,000 foot horizontal lateral wells. So these wells are almost, 3 miles long, and did that for a while. I was where the finance met the engineering, met the geophysics and the economic modeling. I'd put all that together, work with teams to understand what those projects would look like. And then I would evaluate them with economic yardsticks and make recommendations on what projects that the company should pursue.
This could be a viable well or not.
Viable well, like how much money is it going to make? How long is it going to make that money for? What's it going to cost to make that money? So your value investment ratios, looking at things like that. And I absolutely loved it. I just found that for me, going back into business for myself would be a better option. Looking at the writing on the wall, you do sort of become a cog in the wheel over time, regardless of how well you do at your job. And so that set me on a journey to just pursue something bigger than myself. And
that's why I think that's something that's really key in like oil and gas, especially, is the higher ups kind of keep more of a distance from the guys that are doing the work or in the field and stuff like that. Simply because when they have to make a decision, they don't want it to be coming from emotion. They literally just have to, they isolate themselves, they look at the papers, they look at the numbers, they look at the bottom line, if it's red or if it's black, and they make decisions from there, right? So
you're talking about the guys out in the field?
Yeah, between the guys out in the field and the guys in the office. And so they don't understand that red is bad, black is good. The guys out in the field don't understand that. And and sometimes it's hard not to take personally when the layoffs come, or when you're making $2 billion for the company. You're like, well, I was profitable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you spent some time in the oil and gas industry yourself, didn't you?
Yeah, I did that. So it's part of my story is that, I subsidized my income of being a safety guy out on the rigs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you say subsidize your income. What do you mean by that? When you were working, getting your business off the ground?
Oh yeah. So I was highly intelligent, right? Because in May of '08, I decided to go from mortgage to real estate, got my real estate license, and crash happened. Like
Oh,
everything
gotcha.
happened, right? And then going through '08, '09, selling real estate, those were my first years. Granted, I'd been in the business, so I understood how everything worked. Had a little leg up on the competition, but I was able to yes, access the backside of short sales and foreclosures and get ahead of the market there because I understood how the banking side of it, right? So I worked with a lot of investors, worked with a lot of people looking to, fix and flip some homes. My record on a short sale was a 20-day VA short sale, which was incredible. It was unheard of. But I also knew the lingo and how to walk in the back door instead of having to go in the front door on a lot of that. But what happened in '09 is I went through a divorce. I
Mm,
was awarded full custody of all five of my kids, so I'm sitting there raising five kids, ages 16 to 4, uh, on my own. No, I didn't get child support. I didn't get anything. It was up to me. So selling real estate in the 2009 recession, we went through real estate
brutal,
recession,
brutal.
and then I worked through that. Got in 2010, and it was kind of crazy because one of the houses I sold was to the safety guy at Occidental Petroleum.
Oh, okay.
And I told him that, he told me he was a safety guy. I was like, oh, that's cool. I worked at a refinery for 7 years before I got into doing mortgages. I, injured my back, so I had to find something to do with my brain. And I said, if you guys ever need any help, I know hydrocarbon safety, confined space, all that kind of stuff, right? And so it was the end of September 2010. I get a phone call, and I'm sitting there. I just had a closing that day. I paid my rent, paid as many bills as I could, and I had $50 left in my pocket. Sitting there looking on my front porch, looking at my Suburban, going, okay, do I put fuel in my car or do I walk 4 blocks and go get food for my kid? And my phone rang, and it was Paul. Paul said, "Hey, I don't know why God's had you on my heart all day. Like,
That's awesome.
do you need a job?" I was like, "Yes, I do." And I did not even ask what it was. He says, okay, I have a rig coming up into Beck, which was 50 miles from home. He says, you can be home with your kids every night. He says, I need safety coverage on it, but you'll be on call. It was a consultant job. Fantastic. Got paid at the end of every hole. We were drilling holes every 5 days. We were doing 18 shot pads. It was great. And they were paying $1,000 a day as a consultant. And that was 100% like God coming through. Like,
Yeah.
it was crazy. So, and that's how I got, that's what I say subsidized. Like, I still was in the industry. I was still selling real estate, and the transactions weren't happening that much, but I had a steady income, and my kids had a great Christmas.
Man, that's what it's about, right? It's a
Right.
family first, and the struggle teaches us how to fight, right?
It does.
And that fight serves us well when it comes time to have the grit factor. When you're running a business, I know that's one of the hugest indicators of whether or not you're going to succeed is how bad do you want it and how
Right.
much fight do you have in you.
Well, and that's one thing that you and I found we have in common, though, is that we have that grit factor from young age, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, part of your story, you came up tough. Like, we both had to, but like I hear your story and I'm like, wow, I thought I had it bad. It was rough, dude. So here's your
And
story.
life teaches you how to handle business, right? But
Right.
it's yeah, I mean, so for me, I think that's why you and I click so well, because we're both kind of on the real estate end of things. And guys, full disclosure, as you're listening to this, just so you know, this isn't going to be like a real estate podcast. This is truly a leadership podcast. But our backgrounds, it does fall in that arena. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today, just as we introduce ourselves. And so Mark being in real estate, me being in real estate, both of us have an oil and gas background. You can see why we're sitting here together. With that being said, my background, where I left off, I was working in finance, became an engineering student at Texas A&M, graduated with honors, was working in corporate America, doing what I absolutely loved, and really, you go through enough in life where you think you realize, okay, well, I know enough to know how to lead well, but then to lead well, you have to follow well. And what I found was that there were some pretty interesting characters that I would found myself having to follow in corporate America, working as a reservoir engineer. And you have to adjust to that. And so, as I went through that process, I made the adjustments where I needed to and learned a lot about myself in that process as well. But then ultimately ended up realizing that, I'm making this company millions of dollars. Why couldn't I go do something for myself to do that as well? And what I'm doing really isn't more about the money. It's not all money driven. And you hear people say that you have to have your why in the morning when you get up. And, my background, you alluded to this, but, I was adopted when I was 6 months old, and I've got a brother and a sister. They're related by blood to my mom and dad. And when I was about 8.5 years old, my brother was a young man. So he's got about 13 and a half years on me. And he ended up having a 6-month-old daughter that passed away, and just heartbreaking for our family. It still impacts me to this day, even though I was a little boy at the time. But that was a lot for my family to handle. And when I was about 8.5 years old, they ended up driving me probably about 3.5 hours away, and they had me go to this place. I went into a room. They said there's cookies in this room, and when I came out of the room, they were gone. At that point, I was kind of stuck wondering, why wasn't I wanted? What happened?
8 years old.
8 years old. You don't really understand.
No.
You don't understand what's going on at the time, but it's interesting because that's been a part of my growth path in life. As you look back at these seasons, you review them differently the older you get, and the more information you take in, and the more perspectives that you have. And so over the years, that's been a propellant for me to grow really well. But the story behind that is I pretty much grew up fighting. So the place that I was in, they ended up murdering 2 kids, and I think they got shut down by the government after I was gone. And the way I found out about that is I was telling my wife the story, and I pulled up the name of the place and found out that they'd been shut down for these murders. And so what they would do, the guys who ran the place, is they would have us push the bunk beds out and fist fight for their entertainment. And if you lost your fist fight, they'd have their way with you, and they'd beat the brakes off of people pretty good. And so they had block A, B, and C, and I was in A. No, excuse me, I was in C. The younger kids were in C. Those that were going through adolescence were in bunkhouse B, and then the ones that were getting ready to age out of the system, they were in A. And what they would do to us is they would mix it between C and B and A, and it didn't matter age, and they'd pit you against each other. So by the time I was 9, I was fist fighting probably 14 and 15-year-olds and winning. I had to, or I was getting my butt stomped into the concrete every night. But you learn a few things about that. You learn how to take things on the chin. But those of us that were stronger, we used to take turns losing those fights because we didn't want the same guys to get it every night. And you learn a thing about friendship and honor and brotherhood and taking care of the people around you. And so I learned that at an early age, that was a good way to do life with the guys around you. So for me in my life, a lot of my friends have become like family, in some ways closer than family, because you go through something like that, and it just rewires you in a different way. You look at people differently. And so coming out of that, grew up in a rough neighborhood. My parents regretted doing that. They brought me out about a year later, took me home. And I was raised by them ever since, but that never left me. The neighborhood I grew up in, you had the drug dealers down the street doing what they were doing.
This is in Texas, right?
This is in Texas, yeah. And it's not like a Detroit situation. You didn't have guys shooting up the block with machine guns or anything crazy like that. But it was nothing for me to roll up on my bike at 11 years old and watch another guy get beat with a crowbar. And I watched his front windshield get smashed in with a rock. And that was a normal occurrence to me. I just sort of rode my bike off and said, well, this is what we're doing today. So all that to say, it made me pretty tough and gave me some grit that I probably wouldn't otherwise have. So I'm thankful for God doing that. And I think that was a gift he gave me coming out of that. And so for me, as I'm growing, I'm going through school, put myself through school, washing cars to be doing architecture. Went into the finance realm, went back to school doing engineering, came out, making great money doing investment analysis. And these things never leave you. And how you treat people, how you interact, how intentional you are about your conversations with people, what you say, even things like that are important, at least where I came from. And, there's a level of self awareness to be had. You don't go through those things very gracefully without some level of self awareness. And so that served me really well in corporate America, but it also gave me the gift of discernment. So I can read a room pretty well. And when you're in corporate America and you're under different leaders, you see the ups and downs of what different leaders provide. And I've learned a lot through that as well. So
kind of funny. We can figure out who's full of crap real quick.
yeah, well, talk's cheap, and it doesn't take but about 3 seconds for me to understand where someone stands, and
Right.
that's a little judgmental at first. You got to be careful. Like obviously, there's a first impression, and past that, I try to give grace and really go slow with that before I just make a make a I don't want to make a quick assumption on somebody, but you also don't want to be foolish either, and
No.
you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to put up with. And if people around you aren't treating you well, it's good to learn that very quickly. And so I'm a firm believer in that. Some might disagree with me, and I'd tell them they're wrong. But
Yeah.
all that to say, this all culminates to a point. So as I'm sitting there thinking about my future, I'm working in corporate America, working as a reservoir engineer, doing investment analysis, loving what I do. I'm realizing that at layoff after layoff, I'm seeing these great people that are getting laid off. It doesn't matter how good you are. A lot of times it was the numbers on the page, or maybe this person over here didn't really like you as much, but you were completely crushing it at work and you were stellar. Maybe you interacted with everyone else very well, but you, for whatever reason, you might have accidentally stepped on a toe. You may not even realize you did. And under the next layoff, we used to call that the layoff hit list. And so they would come in and they would cut people accordingly. And it was really unfortunate to watch, but it also kind of showed me, I guess, how corporate America is wired. And, you don't want to be on the receiving end of being at the mercy of what they decide on paper. And so I put my 2 weeks notice in, and I went back into real estate, and I started the Smith Global Group, and my daughter helped me start that. And we call it the Smith Global Group. Obviously, our last name is Smith, but the global piece has to do with global adoptions. And one of our goals, we're working on standing a nonprofit up to help children get adopted. And so 10% of all of our profits go to help them get adopted. And one of the other things about what we're doing is the podcast. And so it's like 3 legs on a stool. We're going to have the real estate company, the nonprofit, and then we'll have the podcast. And
we really want to reach out to people, right? We want people to understand that, this is not just, we mountains in leadership, but it's like anybody can pull themselves up and work and put the work in and get to where they need to go. That's why we kind of share our stories.
That's right. Yeah. And that's a big piece of this. And, one of the subcaptions in Mountains of Leadership is we say it's the highs and lows of life and business. And so you're going to have your high points and your low points, whether it be in life or with what you're trying to build in terms of a business or working in corporate America. But what we want to do is help those folks. We want to share our stories. We want to provide valuable content for people to consume that just makes them better. And so that's our primary goal, and with an overarching focus of leaving a good legacy for our own families, and then teaching other people how to do that as well. And so,
perfect.
Mark, I kind of feel like I cut you off a little bit. Could you go into your story a little more? And
well, it's where do I start here? So we'll just go to I was born and raised in Wyoming. So I've figured out growing up that the reason a lot of people like to live in isolated places is because they want their lives to be a secret.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we were, I grew up seeing my mom get beat a lot. I got beat a lot. And when I say a lot, I'm like, nobody should see their mother with 2 black eyes afraid to leave the house for the next 2 weeks.
That's jacked up.
The last time there was a hand laid on me was my 17th birthday. So I can swallow my throat. I just won my first state title wrestling, so I was not a slouch. I just flex my neck. I said, go for
So you knew how to handle business,
it.
and you showed them.
If it makes you feel like a man, go for it. And it was just like I'd had enough. Um, and then so I grew up like, but we were dirt poor too, because he worked for he was a union pipe fitter in the '80s. Growing up in the '80s, it was really tough. The oil and gas, like all the finances, the economies, like Reagan, you know, that was when Reagan was pulling us out of where we'd come from in the '70s with some of the crashes we've gone through there. If you guys follow economics, but I was 10 years old when I hired out on my first farm outside of our small farm. $2 an hour. I was working 10-hour days, and the first thing that they had me do when I got over there was Steve and Pat Mitchell, great people, love these guys. But Steve said, water pump on that Ford needs to be changed. Here's a new one. And I was 10 years old. It took me 2 days, and I changed out a split body water pump on a Ford 460. And it worked. 10 years old by
Wait,
myself.
So you're 10 years old.
10 years old.
And you're turning wrenches on this truck by yourself.
Yep.
Solid.
100%. Figuring out works problem. Figure it out. You gotta get through it. And I mean, I was a problem solver. I was like in that gifted and talented growing up and all that stuff, right? And so we always figured out puzzles, problems. Like that's the thing. That's why we learned how to work through life. So had I been able to, your home life really dictates so much of where you go, because you can put in all the effort you want during the school day and get as far as you want. But I mean, and put in everything you can, but that's only 7 to 8 hours of your day.
Right.
The rest of the time is when you're at home. And that's the rest of the time. I mean, that was the rough part of being in Wyoming, because if it wasn't summertime, I was stuck in the house or go out to a barn, go out, find something to clean out, shovel, whatever, until I could drive. I was driving at 14. But I had to find ways to entertain myself. Reading magazines, building stuff. Remember, my grandfather got me an erector set. we were so poor. Like I had this, I built up this little crane thing, whatever, but we couldn't even afford D batteries to hook the motor up to run the winch. So, being the smart kid I was, I saw there were 2 prongs on the back of this motor, hacked me a 110 cord, spliced it back, peeled it back, hooked them up there, and plugged it in. That motor didn't last long. I mean, it was a 3-volt DC electric motor. I just ran 110 through, right?
Burn that up very quickly, I'm sure.
I was like always into little stuff like that, but it was my escape from my reality. And we're going to get into words here a little bit later, which is a fantastic topic. And then when I was 28 years old, I was going through just this whole, like, I guess you can say renaissance, if you will. Trying to figure out who I was, going through some therapy, counseling. This Christian counselor, her name was Elaine. I was going through some EMDR, eye movement desensitization therapy. It was fantastic for PTSD.
So you had PTSD, and what was that stemming from?
From
the childhood stuff. Okay, gotcha. So you're like coming out of that, it leaves this residual.
Yeah, it leaves just scars after scars after scars, and you can just peel it back one layer at a time, right? But it took years, counseling, years of therapy to get through that.
So where did you finally land in your mind coming out the other end of that counseling? So I mean, do you ever feel truly healed from that, or are you still fight with it sometimes?
Right now, I truly I feel healed.
That's awesome.
But it took me until 5 years ago to finally, and that was started when I was 28. Also, when I was 28, I found out that the man that raised me and beat me and my mom so profusely wasn't even my real father. I was literally on my knees praying one day, and I just felt this anger welling up. I said, God, I don't want to be like my father. And I heard this voice right here in the back of my head, right behind my ear. Might sound weird, but it said, he's not your father. I turned around and I was like, I swore somebody was going to be standing there. It wasn't. And I knew that voice so profoundly that I called my mother the next day and I was like, Mom, I got a question for you. I said, is there any chance this isn't my real father? Because I mean, she had me when she's 17.
Right.
So I do the math. Like my mom got pregnant with me when she was 16. So I knew like, okay, like I just called my mom like something that,
You asked her a really hard question. I mean, that's
tough.
right.
And she denied it. Like she's like, no, and I felt it. My spirit cringed, my heart. My mother just lied to me. And I was like, okay, like this is not good. I was mad because I knew what I heard. I knew what I was so close. So a couple weeks go by, my mom was calling, leaving me messages. I was not able to have that conversation just yet. And finally, my grandfather, who was my favorite person in the world, her dad, he's a Marine. God rest his soul. I called him GP. I'm now GP. I got the name carried down. But he called me and says, you need to talk to your mom. And I said, I'm not her grandpa. He says, well, you need to talk to her. I said, about what? He says, you just do it. He said, it's about my dad, isn't it? He says, about your dad. I said, well, this isn't my real father. He says, how'd you know? I said, God told me. And that day I waited for Les to get off work. I called him and I was just like, if you've heard that song "Coward of the County" by Kenny Rogers,
yeah, I've heard it.
You could have heard a pin drop when Tommy stopped to lock the door. That's what it was when he picked up that phone. And I was like, I know the truth. He says, about what? I said, about my father. He says, you do, huh? Who told you? I said, Grandpa, because I was in no mood at this point.
Wait, so you're on the phone with the father you grew up with,
the man that beat me and my mom,
and you're having this conversation.
With him, and I called him up, and I said, I know the truth. He says, who told you? I said, Grandpa. He says, well, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't change anything. So as far as I'm concerned, it changes everything. I said, you have nothing over me anymore. I said, you'll be welcome around me and my family. But if you ever raise your voice or your hand to me or remember my family again, I will tear your effing head off. I said, that's the way you raised me. That's the way I will treat you. And I mean, I tried reaching out to this man many times, just like trying to extend him grace stuff. In 2007, I actually invited him to my house to try and just hang out with the kids, whatever. He couldn't stay off the alcohol long enough to even have an enjoyable time. Just started screaming and yelling. I was like, all right, we're done.
Kick rocks.
Kick rocks. And
so where are you at today? Are you guys in contact at all at this point? Okay.
No, not in contact at all. I did find my biological father. He had just gotten out of prison, 2 years for 9 DUIs, and it's kind of a crazy story, but I don't have a relationship with either one of them. And that's okay because, the men that coached me wrestling, the men that I grew up looking up to as idols, that I grew up looking to as true men, they did more to form my life than anything. And they put the words in my heart that I carry out today, and to be able to raise my 5 kids on my own.
One of my favorite quotes you'll hear me say is, sometimes the only thing a strong man understands is somebody stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew early on that, for me, this part of my healing was, if I was going to heal and become somebody that I needed to be for my own kids, that I had to get some strength. And I don't just mean that in a physical sense, but I mean that in a mental sense too, in my mind. I mean that with my walk with God, things like that. And I knew that there was no way that I was going to be able to be the man I needed to be for my own kids without God. And so I bring that up because I think it's awesome to know you're also a Christian as well. And, having that gift of discernment, that's an amazing gift to have, but it's also a heavy gift because you see things that others may not see, and it causes you to have conversations with people and go places others might not go.
Right.
And if I'm thinking about that right, that's what I'm hearing off of you, right?
Absolutely.
But there's solace and healing in that, having those conversations, it sounds like, and you being able to have that closure really helped.
Well, it did. And then, like, I just shared this story with Charles here a little bit ago, right? When I was going through, I got involved with this woman as a biblical counselor in Grand Junction, Colorado. Her name was Linda Pringle. And that was after my second divorce. And I'm like, there's something wrong. Like, I've got to get this fixed. This is when I finally got the healing I need. And that was I looked up Christian counselors, and this Grace and Peace Biblical Counseling came up, and I was like, okay, I don't know what this is, but I feel like this is where I need to go. And
Right.
so we got going. I got going there, and
so she helps you. She walks you through.
It was complete scriptural. Like everything was like lining and walking through forgiveness, doing all this stuff. But after I'd been going there about a month, she was like, Mark, like, I think we've got some confusion here. She said, do you believe that there's anything you can do to earn God's favor? Like, yeah, I'm supposed to be a good person. I'm supposed to do this. I started listing things off. She just shook her head. Like, no, like, this is the point you're missing.
Right.
Because you think you're not legalistic, but you are. Because if you think that there's one thing you can do to earn God's favor, then the cross is irrelevant. And it just, I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, really? I was that far, like, I was still trying to earn God's favor like I tried to earn my stepdad's favor, and trying not to get beat, and trying not to get my mom beat, and trying to keep him, distracted, I was trying to, like, I won 2 state titles wrestling. I was an All-American in college. I was like, if I did good enough, I didn't get beat. If I lost, I got beat in the back hall again. It was just...
You lost twice. So it's like, one of the things early on that hit me is our earthly father can taint how we see God.
Exactly.
And
I was trying to earn his love. Well,
and that's perfect for today, because what we wanted to talk about even was how what you say, what you do, what you say matters. Words do matter. And going through stuff like that, I'm sure the beatings didn't come without the words to go with them. Mm. And that does something to you, right? And you live with that. And, it's only through God that we have that healing, which, guys, I want to say, for our listeners, we're not here to cram God down your throat, but we're also not going to run away from those conversations. And so, whether or not you're a believer, if you're an agnostic or you're an atheist, no matter where you stand, and maybe you believe in something, but it isn't the God of the Bible, these conversations and these things are still fruitful for learning and growing in wisdom. And if you apply them in business, you apply them with how you carry yourself with others and what you do with your life, there's still a lot of value here. And so we would just encourage you, don't run away from our podcast if you hear us talking about that. But Mark and I just sat and talked. We're not gonna act like we're something we're not.
No, absolutely not.
And so we are gonna have that in our conversation, and we want our conversations to be edifying as well. So we ask that you give us grace on that and give us a chance, and we promise you won't go wrong.
No, not at all.
But yeah, going back to this. So I just had to kind of lay that groundwork there. This is our episode 1 officially. Right. We're still figuring things out. Yeah. We'll improve and refine over time, but that is one thing that'll always be there is what we believe to be true, what we know to be true. And those things are fruitful and good for our lives. And with that being said,
the power of words, right?
The power of words. I mean, it's all over the Bible, and we're going to talk about that today as well. But where we're at today is, why do words matter? What are you saying to people? And I want to be careful here. There's so many ways that you can approach this. So how you talk to somebody or how you talk to your kids, that has a long lasting consequence. The way you say something, the way you deliver something, when you say it, how you say it, what you say to others about others, what you have others say to others for you.
What do you say to yourself?
What do you say to yourself is one of the biggest. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that voice in your head is a residual echo of something from your past that's chasing you that you haven't dealt with. And I think that applies to my life. I think that applies to your life as well, just knowing your background.
Right.
And
there's this quote that you and I discussed last week, and it's one of my favorite quotes. It says, be careful of your thoughts, for they become your words. Be careful of your words, for they become your actions. Be careful of your actions, for they become your habits. Be careful of your habits, they become your character. Be careful of your character, for they become your destiny.
That's right.
And it is true. It's absolutely true. Like, how many times have you heard, show me your 5 closest friends, and the 5 people you look up to, and I'm going to show you your future.
Yeah, that's a lot of where that comes from. I mean, it's It's really true. And words do matter. Now, I'm not, as a man, and I mean, this applies to the ladies too, but as a man, I'm not advocating for you to be offended at every little thing somebody says. Like, to some degree, there's some value in having thick skin, right? And being able to discern, hey, that wasn't meant to harm me, or hey, that wasn't intended that way, or and there's grace in that. Like, you're not going to hold people's feet to the fire for everything they say every time they offend you, and those things you can overcorrect and go too far. And of course, you get into the politics of it all. You see some people being called snowflakes, and the other side calling them snowflakes, and then you see the other side calling them misogynists or bigots, or you
Right.
fill in the blank. And at times I think, regardless of
I
if
love
you're,
the name calling everywhere.
well, it's ridiculous, and it's the whole snowflake moniker is, well, you can't handle hard words, and I think there's a place for hard words. If
Deplorables. That's the other thing.
well, there's that one. There's that one. I mean, there's a whole gamut of them, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum. And quite frankly, I don't really care what side of the aisle you sit on. I'll sit and have a conversation with anybody. And but the words matter, and you hear them talk about snowflake, and, well, you can't hack it. But what about the other side of it? What about the other side of the coin? I think there's some wisdom in stepping back and saying, hey, you know what? Sometimes words really do matter, and they have a residual impact on our lives, whether we like to admit that or not. And the whole moniker of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is not true. I would advocate that it's completely false. And if you disagree with me, you can send me an email at psmith.sgg@gmail.com, and I'll tell you you're wrong. But we can still be friends, and I'll explain my position even further. But there's a right and a wrong way to talk to people, and especially if you're a parent, but also if you are leading a team in business, how you talk to the folks that you're coaching, that you lead, that matters. What you say to other people that God's put in front of you, that matters. What you say about them behind their back,
leaders worth following.
that matters. Yeah. And good leaders worth following, they bring life to the conversation, and they will propel people forward more than they will hinder them. Yeah, I've got a few notes here I wanted to go through, and some of the things that I've heard in corporate America. The one at the top that I want to go through is this whole saying of perception is reality. That's intended to minimize what somebody is experiencing. Now, sometimes we need to weigh that. If somebody's being unrealistic, well, your perceptions may be a little off. Maybe there's a lack of self-awareness in something. But if there's a real concern and they bring that to you as a leader in your company, and your answer to them is, well, perception is reality, what you're effectively telling them is, well, that's your perception, therefore it's your reality, but I disagree. That's effectively what you're saying. And that's a problem, because when somebody's coming to you and they're talking to you and they need some coaching or something's going on, the last thing you want to do is shut them down. You want to have the dialogue, and you start asking why. That's what you should be doing. You should be saying, okay, well, why do you feel that way? Well, tell me about this aspect of it. Well, help me understand this piece of it. And as you begin to put those pieces together, that's really going to put a good picture in place of what that person's going through. And so, if you're leading a team or you're in a leadership position high up in a company somewhere, and you find yourself saying this a lot, I would highly encourage you to stop. Because what those words communicate to your subordinate is that they don't really matter. Mm-hmm. They're going to get slapped down. They don't feel like they can be comfortable enough to come talk to you about something. Now, if you're the subordinate, I want to talk to you for a minute. Because when I was in project management working for a bank, I had people that reported to me. And when I would have somebody come to me with something, I was leading a team or whatever, and they had an issue, one of the first things I would look for is an element of self-awareness in that person. If they had an element of self-awareness and we can get through that gate, like the way that they're explaining it, have they thought it out, all of that, you can see the self-awareness piece. The next thing I would look at is, did they try to solve this problem themselves? And what was the outcome of that? But either way, now they're on my radar. And so you as a subordinate, when you do bring these issues forward and you're having an issue, I would say make sure that you've taken the time to have some self-awareness in that, because you are going to be on leadership's radar to some degree. Now, if you're a good leader, that doesn't necessarily change how you treat that person. It may actually be a valid complaint, and so you're gonna weigh that accordingly. But
Well, and it's just like there's the saying, like, if you've seen divorces happen, you've seen this kind of stuff happen, right? And they always say there's three sides to every story: his, hers, and the truth.
right,
And there's always there's always a little bit of room for like perception can sometimes skew us a little bit too, because we're bringing everything that we know of that we to believe to be our truth and what our perception is, and there's that word again, but from the way we look at something is actually going to be through a filter. And we have to ask these people, what's your filter? Where are you coming at me from on that?
well, and it's the key though to that is understanding that we all have filters, and trying to give those filters a name and identifying them, because that changes the conversation directly. But that's the whole point. There should be a dialogue and a conversation. So when you're leading a team, or you're leading in your family with your kids, you've got a complaint between one sibling or the other, whatever that is, the last thing you want to do is shut that down. You want to open that for dialogue, because that's an opportunity for you to build trust with that person. And one of the things I want to be careful about, we talked about the topic of divorce. And so I would advocate, it's not always their truth, your truth, and then the truth. There's this concept of postmodernism that there is no truth. It's only the lens you look through, which the Bible clearly states we know there is a truth. We know that killing is wrong. That is a truth. If we took postmodernism to its practical conclusion, we could basically say, well, you know what? For me, my truth is that killing is actually healing to me and makes me feel better. And it's a good thing because I'm releasing the person from the pain on this earth. So for me, my truth is that killing a person is good. That is not necessarily the case, right?
That is not a truth.
And whether you agree with the Bible or not, I mean, it says, thou shalt not kill. I think that there's a pretty baseline understanding in society that murdering people is wrong. But the whole idea of my truth, your truth sort of starts to break apart when we take that down to its natural proclivity down the road. What really helps us, though, I think is what you're saying, Mark, is understanding that people do have these lenses, and not everybody is actually going to take the time to look at those lenses and see what their filters might be. And so,
well, Stephen Covey,
Stephen Covey, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? One of them was seek first to understand, then to be understood.
That's right.
So it's try and see what they're saying. Okay. 80, but then, okay, let's talk about this. Everything's opening dialogue.
Opening dialogue, and it's, when you open that dialogue with the people that look to you to lead, the trust that's built from that is, you can't assign a value to that, because having the trust between those people on your team, they will move mountains for you. Mm-hmm. And, at the end of the day, what you do say matters. And, we talked about our past and things that, that are residual from that. But this is an example that you find in business. You hear that being said quite a bit. Another one on the street, maybe you're talking with friends. You ever heard someone say, well, it is what it is?
It is a highly desensitized person that really does not care.
Jaded.
They don't care. Their heart is as hard as a rock. It is what it is. In other words, I don't care.
I don't care.
I just don't care.
That communicates I don't care. That's an opportunity to engage the person again in dialogue. Mm-hmm. And it can be a moment to build up and encourage, or it can be a moment to completely shut them down. So you have someone confiding in you. I'm going through this hard thing. Oh, well, it is what it is. That's great, man. Thank you. Moving on. Well, you're definitely not somebody that I'm going to put a lot of value in that relationship, because you obviously don't care enough to even have the dialogue. You're dismissive.
It's so dismissive.
Yeah, and it's arrogant. It's kind of rude, right? And so I'm just going to hit that quickly. On the flip side of that, what I would replace these things with would be this: have you considered ... fill in the blank? Have you considered, that this might be the case or that might be the case? And then you dialogue it. And instead of talking to people in a manner that just sort of beats them down or just sort of cuts them off, this is a way to come into that conversation and just have that dialogue in a healthy manner. And it can be healing for that person as well. And, all these things, again, I'm the kind of guy, I have pretty thick skin, but I'm also no nonsense. And I won't let people talk to me a certain way. And I'm a firm believer that we teach people how to treat us by what we're willing to put up with. And so I'm not advocating for not having thick skin and just being whiny and all that all the time. That's a bad look. Probably not going to get very far with anyone with that kind of posture.
How much of this comes from a critical spirit, too? Like,
how much of it comes from the own thoughts in your own head?
Mm-hmm. The thoughts about yourself and you're projecting it on others.
How much of that comes from the things that have happened to us in our lives and the things that have been said to us?
Exactly.
And
the words took root.
And that's it. And I think that there's a lot of value in understanding this, and not only when you're talking to your own children, but when you're leading a team, when you're in business. And so I'm driving that nail in the board hard, if you can tell, because this applies everywhere. One thing I wanted to get into, this is a really interesting study. Have you heard of the monster study?
You shared that with me last week, and I was blown away.
Okay.
Like, absolutely shocked.
Did you read through that?
Children. Oh my goodness. This is 1939. Like, oh my goodness. Like, you actually did this to children.
Man, it's jacked up. Yeah, let's get into that real quick. I've got some notes on here.
It is, what blew me away the most was that, they actually found, I guess what blew me away the most about the study is they were so embarrassed about the study they didn't publish it.
Well, they didn't publish it. It was, so for the people viewing, let me give you some background. This was a psychologist that did a study, Professor Wendell Johnson at the University of Iowa. This was done in the late 1930s. And what they did is they went into this foster care home and they picked this group of kids out. And what they were trying to do is determine if they could trigger in those kids a stuttering mechanism to make them stutter and lower their confidence. Even if they didn't have stuttering problems. So they took kids that had stuttering issues and they had them in one group. And then they took kids out of the foster care location that they were doing the study at that didn't have stuttering issues.
No speech impediments whatsoever.
No speech impediments whatsoever. Some of them had been talking for 15 years. They had 15-year-olds in the study. And so what they wanted to do is try to see if their words could have an impact on a psychological issue that a kid was going through. And so the kids that didn't stutter, they broke those kids into a separate group, and they told some of them, you have a stuttering issue, you have a problem, watch what you say, watch what you are telling people, and watch how you talk. And they harped on them.
It was so hypercritical.
It's jacked up. And this kind of study, they would not get grant approval in any university to do that at this point, I think, due to the ethics. But I'm going to get into this. I'm just going to read some of this real fast. So one of the primary objectives of the Tudor study, so this was Tudor's student, Wendell Johnson, actually did the study, was to determine whether labeling a person previously regarded as a normal speaker as a stutterer would have any effect on his or her speech fluency. Tudor screened the children in an orphanage and selected 6 who were regarded as normal speakers, so they didn't have a speech impediment, to serve as a subject. Their chronological ages were 5 years old, 9, 11, then there's 2 12-year-olds, and then a 15-year-old. She made the following statement to each child at the beginning of the experiment. The staff has come to the conclusion that you have a great deal of trouble with your speech. The types of interruptions which you have are very undesirable. There's interruptions indicating stuttering. You have many of the symptoms of a child who is beginning to stutter. You must try to stop yourself immediately. Use your willpower. Make up your mind that you are going to speak without a single interruption. It's absolutely necessary that you do this. Do anything to keep from stuttering. Try harder to speak fluently and evenly. If you have any interruptions, stop and begin again. Take a deep breath whenever you feel you're going to stutter. Don't ever speak unless you can do it right. You can see how, fill in the name of the child here, you can see how so-and-so stutters, don't you? And they would point to a kid that actually had a stuttering issue that the other kid knew. And so you can see how they stutter, don't you? Well, he undoubtedly started the same way you are starting. Watch your speech every minute and try to do something to improve it. Whatever you do, speak fluently and avoid any interruptions whatsoever in your speech. So they went to these kids that had no issues, and that's the dialogue that they had with them, with their words.
And they told me they needed to be hypercritical of themselves.
That's right.
Just like so overly.
Right.
The pressure.
So in addition, she goes on, she made the following statements to the teachers and matrons who interacted with these kids. So listen to this. The staff has come to the conclusion that these children show definite symptoms of stuttering. The types of interruptions they are having very frequently turn into stuttering. We have handled a number of cases very similar to these children. You should impress upon them the value of good speech, and that in order to have good speech, one has to speak fluently. Watch their speech all the time very carefully and stop them when they have interruptions. So they basically said, every chance you get, call this kid out, even though they didn't have an issue. Every chance you get. So watch their speech all the time very carefully and stop them when they have interruptions. Stop them and have them say it over. Don't allow them to speak unless they can say it right. They should be made very conscious of their speech, and also they should be given opportunities to talk so that their mistakes can be pointed out to them. It is very important to watch for any changes in the child's personality.
Yeah. I believe that would fall under cruel and unusual punishment. That is, so gross.
One of the things I want to hit pause here on, I know we're talking about the power of words, but they went into an orphanage where these kids had no one to advocate for them. I mean, they had workers there. I'm just, I wasn't in
the... They just punch clock.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard for me to really land on a true opinion there because I wasn't around in the late 1930s. I can speak from my own experience and what I went through, and we talked about that earlier. But it's just hard for me to read this because I don't know. You just kind of imagine what was going on there. No advocate for these kids. They had workers there.
After your kids, my kids.
That'd be a bad day for them.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be a really bad day. Yeah, I just struggle with this. And so, guys, part of what we do is one of our goals is to help kids get adopted. If you want any more information about that, let me know. Okay, so I'm gonna go on here. So tutors spoke to the children and their teachers and matrons at least once a month for a semester in order to attempt to reinforce the label stuttering. She reported the following description of the children's speech at the end of the semester. So here's the results of what they did. Result number 1, they observed a decrease in verbal output of all 6 subjects. They were reluctant to speak and spoke only when they were urged to. Number 2, their rate of speaking was decreased. They spoke more slowly with greater exactness. They had a tendency to weigh each word before they said it. Number 3, the length of the response was shorter. The 2 younger subjects responded with 1 word whenever possible. Number 4, they were more self-conscious. They appeared shy and embarrassed in many situations. And number 5, they accepted the fact that there was something definitely wrong with their speech. There's nothing wrong with these kids.
So
the last thing that they found here, number 6, every subject reacted to his speech interruptions in some manner. Some hung their heads, others gasped and covered their mouths with their hands, others laughed with embarrassment. In every case, the children's behavior changed noticeably. This is sick. So when you're talking to somebody, I go to my own kids. I've got 3 daughters and a son. And you wonder, what you say, that has the potential to become a part of who they are. And it's important as a father, as a mother. I'm not a mother, but I'm going to put that in there because you as a mom, you have a potential to impact your kids as well, just as much, if not more, in some cases. Um, we as parents need to own our relationships with our kids, and we need to be very intentional with them. Now, I'm not saying that we need to be blamed for everything they do wrong, but we also can't take credit for everything they do right either.
No. How many times can you go back? Like, I can think of a few times in particular raising my kids, especially on my own, right? I can go back and say, oh, I wish I could take those. Just reading this just brings those thoughts back and those memories back of, oh, I just want to go call my kid and say, I love you right now.
We should both do that after this.
Seriously.
Yeah, I mean, this is some interesting work. I mean, yeah, they were too embarrassed to publish it, rightfully so. They need to be taken behind a woodshed. But most of the people that were involved with this study are either no longer with us, any of the witnesses anyway, or the kids. I think they're actually in their 80s now.
That's the youngest one.
That's the youngest ones, yeah. So let's go forward here. So there was a noticeable difference in these kids based on, I mean, I would call this just abuse in general. I'm not even going to candy coat that.
Abuse to the power of suggestion only.
That's it.
Yeah.
But it was very intentional, right? Like they knew what they were doing. That's why I call that abuse, because you actively pursued and engaged this process. They're the ones that put the plan together to execute it. So I don't really have much for them. I don't know them personally, but it's really unfortunate, right?
Oh, they felt some remorse.
Well, yeah. So getting into the remorse piece of this, the lady who did the study and was actually with the kids, so she actually goes back to the orphanage, realizing what she had done, and she tries to fix it. So listen to this. Sometime following the study's completion, Johnson was notified by the orphanage that the changes in the children, communicative behavior, had not only persisted, but there was concern that at least some of them had become stutterers. Tutor, of course, was concerned about the children and visited them periodically for at least several years after the study. At least some of them continued to stutter. The findings of Tudor's study provide strong evidence that diagnosing normal disfluency as stuttering can cause stuttering itself. So you tell your kids, you speak life into them, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're this or you're that. Well, what will they become?
That.
What will they become? Maybe not, but
that's the seed you're planting, though.
It is, and that is, that's the thing. That's the heart of this, right? So it's, man, it's interesting. This study is very interesting to me because it does.
They destroyed their confidence at a young age. Completely demolished it. Took their confidence and stomped it into the ground.
So, Mark, can we? I want to go deeper with your story for a little bit. You talked about your father that you grew up with, and then it wasn't more than about 5 years ago that you finally had peace with all of that. Looking at this study, do you look at indicators in your own life going back to those times, and you can trace these things back to him, or where would you?
Like you said, it was. And it wasn't just him, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I was a skinny little kid. I was kind of a runt. I was 75 pounds in 7th grade. Right?
Right.
I was like, but, I would honestly say I was a little bit malnourished. Growing up, we didn't grow up great. My feet are short and wide. Literally, my foot size is an 8 quadruple 8, which is basically a square foot. And it's like crazy. They're really stable on that and fighting and stuff, but
those things he said to you,
it wasn't just the things he said. It was the way that I was treated, because words become actions, right? And when the actions start to reinforce the words, that makes more damage, because they're.
Well, we see that here, right?
Okay, and we see it through the bullying too. That was what I was saying. I grew up the scrawny kid and the bullying. Starting as early as 1st grade. When I moved to the new town, and I was the outcast. I was the power plant trash. Moved to Wheatland, Wyoming for a power plant job, and none of the farmers wanted the power plant there, but it was getting built. So, so I was just power plant trash. And, the bullying started there. And the bullying continued until I got into high school, and I had, I won my first state championships in freestyle Greco in eighth grade at 115 pounds. I'm 6 foot tall, 130 pounds. I can hold my own. And that's when I started using my fists to get my respect.
You're what they call wiry at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Wiry and mean.
Yep.
So, you look at what they did here. I didn't mean to interrupt a minute ago, but they go to these teachers, right? And so their whole environment is architected around them, these kids. And they're told these same things and reinforced these same things, not only from the psychologists that they're meeting with, but the people around them. And so I kind of equate that to what you're talking about with the bullying and, the home life. It's like the whole realm in which your life was occupied by. I mean, it perpetuated itself, right? So, right. I mean, in my own life, I mean, some of the words that I would hear is, you're never going to be anything. You're not going to be much. Now I did have a few people there that were encouraging, and to them, I'm forever grateful. But yeah, so I mean, this is
words are very important to us.
Well,
they draw into our path. That's why this is important for us to speak about to begin with.
Absolutely, and this study really is a good indicator of just where those things can land a person depending upon how they're treated growing up. And so, one of the things that's really interesting here. So 5 out of the 6 children were considerably beyond the age at which stuttering ordinarily begins. They had experienced being a normal speaker for as long as 15 years before they were a part of the study. So they were already stable, and somebody comes in and completely derails the trajectory that they're on. I found that very profound. And so, this study is just a good indicator of why our words do matter. And
they tried to get some vindication, right?
They did. So, well, they actually sued. I think it was like in 2014. I think they settled in like 2015. I saw something on a Fox News article where they went in and I think they sued for millions of dollars, and the state fought them on that. And they actually ended up getting a settlement for $925,000.
And 6 of those people split $900,000, and one person got $25,000.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And so there really, in my mind, there wasn't any justice there.
And it was their estates, even not even that person. It was the estates of those people.
Well, and a lot of these folks, they were 70 years old at that time. So I mean, they were already up there in age, and they didn't even understand. It's mind-boggling. They didn't understand what had happened to them because they didn't release this research. It wasn't until this research was released years later that these people saw it and realized what had been done to them, and that's where the lawsuit was kicked off. And so they ended up suing, and they really didn't get much. But
imagine, just like the actions of these people derailed lineage and generations, because they absolutely removed positivity and love from their lives, and just boom, boom. I mean, it's hereditary. That kind of reaction and response, and the injection of negativity and criticism and all that. That is not something that's easily broken.
No, that's.
And I'll be honest, it's taken me a lot of years to not be critical, and a lot of figuring out what grace was.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's for me, I look at the struggles that I've had, and you take the sins of somebody else that has caused the pain in your life, and I think taking ownership and going to God with those things is a step one to that, to be able to move forward.
Most of them are not going to get an apology.
No, you're not necessarily. And I've even had those own instances where I've been hurt by people's words and not received any apology. In fact, they tend to have selective amnesia, which is it's kind of convenient for those people. That's right.
Really, I don't remember saying that.
That's a good way of like not having to be accountable. Um, but we're all accountable, and if we're not accountable to the people we hurt, we're accountable to God either way. So I just encourage people, if you're listening to this, take ownership of what you say, how you conduct yourself, and you have the potential to lead well in your life. You have the potential for your words to be life giving to others, and there's power in that. And it's not weak to be kind to people. It's not weak to treat people with genuine care. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, this study just sort of drives home a lot of things and brings home a lot of points for me in my own life. I mean, coming out of the facility I was in, so I'm 10 years old at that point. I won't say who. One parent sits me down and says, "Hey, it was my idea to put you there. I never wanted you. Your other parent, it was their idea to adopt you, so you're their kid." And I struggled with that for a long time. And it wasn't until I took ownership and said that, I'm going to be larger than life for my kids, that I'm out to show the world that it doesn't have to be like that. That's where you find solace, and that's where the healing comes. And I look at my little boy, and it's really interesting because as he grows, I heal, because he gets to be something that I never got the chance to be. And so for that, I'm grateful. I've got some closing thoughts here prepared for our audience, and I just want to share those before we break off for the day. I'll go ahead and go through that now. Whether you're seeking to lead in corporate America, in your family, or in your business you build, I urge you, be disciplined with your words. Be purposeful with what you say and how you say it. Intent is not enough. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Legacy leavers operate in ways that transform lives. They speak less and they say more. At times, their words land heavy. More often, their words build trust and confidence. They bring life to those around them, and their words act as the fuel that drives others towards something better. Mental fortitude and self-discipline act as pillars in a person's life. However, they cannot stand without being built on a foundation of integrity and good character. These forces hold up the relationships, the businesses, the teams, and the families that we seek to build. These things are the houses of legacy in which we reside. Our thoughts and the words of others can have a resounding impact on who we are and who we become. They can act as fissures or cracks in our own confidence, or they can come in the form of echoes and slanderings set afloat to injure us. One crack, one fissure, the weight of overwhelming insecurity and grief can send the house crashing down if we let it. However, there's something better to be done. We should not allow the echoes of insecurity or hurt to ring loud in our own minds and hearts. Echoes come from the voids created in the lonely spaces of our own minds. We must fill these spaces with good things, good words, and good people, and the peace that comes from knowing that we have the power to own who we are and who we become. We must plot a course toward intentionality and resolve regarding these matters. This starts by taking responsibility for where we are today and cultivating a strong mind driven by the desire to live honorable lives. The truth is that words matter, somehow more than we realize. For guidance in these matters, we go to the wisdom of Proverbs. The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. When words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent. Therefore, I urge you to consider, what is your legacy and what is the legacy that you are building? Your motives reveal your true intentions. Take heed and consider these things as you go forward, and go forward well.
That's fantastic. Well written. It's I can't clear your thoughts there, but I think it is a call to action. Like it really is, because we need to go forward well. We need to make a difference, and it really, just take some pure smooth water, right? Throw a pebble in the middle of it. Those waves continue on for a long ways, and we can create some waves.
Just think about this. Picture yourself playing with your kids. And let's say you're in your 30s, maybe you're in your 40s or early 50s, however old you are. And I want you to think about a day. Maybe you're 80, 90 years old on your deathbed, and you're thinking back to the very day in front of you. And you wish you could go back there. What would you do different? That would be how I urge everyone to live their lives. I don't mean to create stress, but there should be some intentionality behind the things that we do and say. That's it for today.
And one thing I want to add on the end of it, talking about legacy.
Yeah.
Legacy is everything. I will tell you that when you get to see your children, how they treat their children,
that's a gift. All right. Well, Mark, thanks for co-hosting with me today. And guys, that's episode 1. This will get better over time. If you like what you saw, hit the like button. Follow us on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all the places. And that's it for today. Pat Smith out.